Hello and welcome to The Complete History of Science, Series 7, Episode 2, A New Star. In 1054 AD, a Chinese astronomer named Yang Weidi noticed something strange in the night sky. Near the constellation of Taurus, a new point of light appeared, brighter than any of the stars or planets. It was so bright, in fact, that it continued to shine during the day. Weidi recorded it as a guest star and sent word of its arrival to the emperor. He wrote that the star heralded a bountiful harvest and that its appearance was a sign from the heavens that China possessed a great and capable ruler. For 23 days, the star shone in the daylight, and it remained visible in the night sky for 2 years. But despite this, no record of the event was recorded in Europe. Earlier still, in 1006 AD, an even more spectacular star was visible on the southern horizon. 6 times brighter than Venus and 3 times larger, there are at least 30 separate accounts of the new star from astronomers in China, Japan, Korea, and the Islamic world. This time, it was noticed in Europe, but only a single account survives, written by the monks of St. Gallen Abbey, north of the Alps. The stark difference in records demonstrates that at the start of the first millennium, astronomy in the West lagged far behind the East. By the late 16th century, though, the intellectual landscape had shifted. In 1572, another new star appeared. Far dimmer than 1006 and 1054, it was still widely observed by astronomers across Europe. Beginning in November, the star twinkled in the night sky for 18 months. Astrologers debated its meaning. War, famine, and pestilence were predicted. One observer saw the star as a sign, like the Star of Bethlehem, and proclaimed the second coming of Christ. More sober commentators wondered what the new star meant for natural philosophy. According to Aristotle, the heavens were immutable and unchanging. A star that appeared out of nowhere seemed to undermine this idea. Some astronomers argued it was not a star at all, but a phenomena within the Earth's atmosphere. This echoed Aristotle's explanation of comets, and most observers were satisfied with this reasoning. One young man, however, was not. Of all those who observed the star, none would be as deeply influenced by it as Tycho Brahe. In previous centuries, Europe had lagged behind the world in astronomy. After Tycho, it would chart the course forward. Tycho was born into the upper echelons of the Danish nobility. Both his grandfathers and all 4 of his great-grandfathers had been members of the Riksråd, the council which advised the king. The Riksråd was an exclusive body containing 20 or so of the most powerful nobles in the Kingdom of Denmark. Tycho's father Otto was a younger son, but through merit had risen to the Riksråd himself. Otto ruled a fief from Knudstorp, the family's ancestral home. Tycho's mother was Bita Billa, also a member of a powerful noble family. While the Brahes were a family of warriors, the Billas were influential in the church. At one stage, the Billas held 7 of the 8 archbishoprics in Denmark. Tycho was born at Knudstorp in 1546, the oldest of 12 children, of which 8 survived until adulthood. But Tycho didn't grow up in Knudstorp alongside his parents and siblings. At 5 years old, he was taken away by his uncle Jørgen. Jørgen brought Tycho to his own castle at Tosterup with the intention of raising the boy himself. Fostering was common at the time, but this incident happened without the consent of Otto or Bita. Even more strangely, there seems to have been little attempt to have the boy returned. Bita had already given birth to another son, Steen, and would be pregnant almost continuously for the next decade. By contrast, Jörgen and his wife Inga were childless, despite their best efforts. History does not record Otto and Bille's feelings about the event, but they clearly didn't fight very hard to have Tycho returned. Jörgen, the elder brother, was a true Brahe. His talent was for war. By contrast, Inga was an ox, a family of thinkers and diplomats. Unlike the Brahes or the Billes, the Oxes were not ancient Danish nobility, but had migrated from France, rising to become one of the most powerful families in the land. Most successful was Peder Ox, brother of Inga, member of the Riksråd, and close advisor to the Danish king. Peder was one of the most skilled diplomats and administrators in Europe. His sister Inga, as a woman, could never hope to hold such power, but she undoubtedly possessed a similar intelligence. Under her influence, Tycho received a broad education. Young nobles typically learned to read, manage their estates, and develop their martial skills. By contrast, Tycho was sent to church school, learnt Latin grammar, Greek, and mathematics. Otto objected to his son's education, calling it a waste of time, but Jörgen disagreed and kept Tycho in school. At 12, Tycho entered the University of Copenhagen, where he followed the so-called trivium of grammar, logic, and rhetoric. Later, Tycho would also study the quadrivium of mathematical sciences, which crucially included astronomy. The astronomy course focused on Sacrobosco's The Sphere, a medieval textbook of geocentric astronomy. But, desiring to know more, Tycho purchased advanced books, including Trigonometry by Regiomontanus and Cosmography by Peter Apian. Tycho's university career set him firmly apart from the rest of the Brahes. His younger brothers were sent to foreign courts to learn languages and diplomacy, practical skills needed by young nobles. By contrast, Tycho pursued mathematics and astronomy, subjects rarely studied by the elite. Tycho's unorthodox path continued after university, when Peder Ox encouraged Tycho to embark on a grand tour of European universities. Ox had made a similar journey himself as a young man, and recommended the trip as an important piece of Tycho's development. Tycho was still only 16, and so a tutor was chosen to accompany him. Anders Vedel was assigned to act as guide and to oversee Tycho's studies. Leaving Denmark by ship, they travelled across the Baltic Sea towards Saxony, where, after a 5-week journey, they arrived at the University of Leipzig. Vedel, probably following Peder's instructions, ensured Tycho followed a course of study concentrating on languages and classical literature. Although Tycho had avoided the military education which his brothers received, he wasn't entirely free. Probably under Peder's direction, Tycho was encouraged to pursue law, a degree which would prepare him for diplomatic and administrative responsibilities. As a young man, Tycho showed no interest in law. He spent his allowance on astronomy books and read at night in secret. His collection included star charts, from which he learnt the constellations, and an ephemeris, which he used to track the position of the planets. Using a taut piece of string, Tycho began measuring the positions of the planets and compared them to his tables. His passion for astronomy brought him into conflict with Vedel, who was tasked with guiding Tycho's learning. A battle of wills followed, but under the circumstances, it's unsurprising Tycho came out on top. Vedel was only 20 years old himself, and a commoner to boot. He could only exert limited control over the willful young noble. Eventually, they reached a détente. Tycho would continue the prescribed course of study, while also finding time for astronomy. In 1563, Tycho observed the great conjunction of Saturn and Jupiter, an event predicted in his ephemeris. An ephemeris, or in plural ephemerides, was a list of planetary positions given at specific times and tabulated over some period. The most accurate ephemeris was based on the work of Copernicus and derived from astronomical tables. In anticipation for the conjunction, Tycho observed the planet's nightly positions, but soon became quite disappointed. As Jupiter and Saturn moved into alignment, he realized that the tables were behind schedule. Comparing the date of the conjunction to his ephemeris, Tycho found an error of at least a couple of days. He checked the predictions from Ptolemaic tables, but found that these were even worse, out by almost a month. This disappointment, though, only seems to have increased Tycho's interest in astronomy. In Leipzig, he found a mentor, Bartholomew Schultz, a German from a prosperous family. Schultz was around 30 years old and an accomplished astronomer. He taught Tycho the details of observational astronomy and gave him his first astronomical instrument, a cross-staff. The cross-staff, along with the sextant and the quadrant, was one of the main astronomical instruments used during the period. Their designs differed, but they all had the same purpose: to measure the angle between astronomical objects. Tycho began to make his own observations. Almost immediately, he realized the instrument was flawed. It contained a calibration error. He corrected for this error, but Tycho was still not happy. He wanted precision. The quest for greater and greater precision would consume Tycho for the rest of his life. He sought instruments with higher and higher resolution and strove to make more and more accurate predictions. After 3 years in Leipzig, Tycho and Wedel headed home to Denmark, but shortly after arriving, he learnt that Denmark and Sweden were at war, and his adoptive father Jørgen was dead. Jørgen was one of the most senior knights in the realm, and had been appointed Vice Admiral of the Danish fleet. Initially, he distinguished himself by capturing the Swedish flagship, but in June 1565, an indecisive battle forced Jørgen to sail back to port in Copenhagen. What followed is unclear, but somehow both Jørgen and Friedrich, King of Denmark, fell into the icy Baltic Sea. It's possible that Friedrich and Jørgen had been drinking, and in a stupor, stumbled into the water. Another possibility is that the king had fallen, and Jørgen had nobly dived in to rescue him. Both men were retrieved, but Jørgen fell ill with pneumonia and died shortly afterwards. Jørgen's death put Tycho in a difficult position. He had never been formally adopted, and so was not officially Jørgen's heir. In the aftermath, Tycho went to live with his birth parents, Otto and Beta. This was the first time Tycho had spent a significant period with them since he was taken away. Though everyone acknowledged that Tycho was the eldest son, he was also a stranger in the house. Tensions grew between Tycho and his father. Otto encouraged Tycho to abandon his academic studies and join the military. When Tycho resisted, Otto was disappointed. Still, Otto must have realized that Tycho would never be a military man. His education had not prepared him for war. As a compromise, Otto hoped to steer Tycho towards diplomacy and administration. With Tycho's younger brothers attending foreign courts, Otto hoped Tycho would follow them. But Tycho refused this idea as well. The ray of light in Tycho's life during this time was his younger sister Sophie. Only 12 or 13 years old, Sophie was clever, playful, and warm. Of all his family members, Tycho developed the closest bond with her and introduced her to astronomy. Sophie's sex would bar her from university, but she would become one of his most loyal assistants. Given the tension at home, Tycho couldn't stay. He travelled to Wittenberg, where his teacher Schultz had settled. Unfortunately, an outbreak of plague caused a mass exodus, and he left along with most other students. He moved to Rostock, where, on the 28th of October, he watched a lunar eclipse. During this time, Tycho indulged in astrology and foretold the death of the Ottoman Sultan Suleiman the Great. This proved embarrassing when it was revealed that Suleiman had died 6 weeks earlier. This might have been a small misstep, but it led to a significant event in Tycho's life. On the 10th of December, Tycho was invited to a betrothal ceremony. Also in attendance was another young Danish noble, Mander at Parsberg, a distant cousin of Tycho. During the celebrations, Manderup mocked Tycho's astrology, and the two men exchanged strong words. A few weeks later, during the Christmas celebrations, they resumed their quarrel. Unfortunately, this time it turned violent. As Danish nobles, both men carried swords, and a duel was inevitable. This was an extremely dangerous situation. Several of Tycho's family members had died in similar confrontations, and the risk was even greater compared to his peers, as Tycho had little experience in swordsmanship. Ultimately, Tycho was fortunate. He received only a large scar down his face and lost the tip of his nose. For the rest of his life, Tycho would wear a metal prosthetic nose made of copper. He even had another one for special occasions, cast in gold. Tycho recovered quickly. It was his pride that had received the greatest blow. He travelled south to Basel, where he renewed his interest in instrument making. Determined to improve the accuracy and resolution of available instruments, he began to construct his own. Tycho made a quadrant, but was unsatisfied with the result. Undeterred, he moved on to Augsburg, where he spent 14 months working with the instrument maker Christoph Schissler. Although Schissler was more of a craftsman than a serious astronomer, Tycho learned a great deal about him, including instrument design and construction. Tycho began to experiment, and he made a large brass sextant, which could measure the angle between objects over a range of 30 degrees. Unfortunately, the sextant had a sighting error, which caused a systematic error in his measurements. Even correcting for this, he realized its precision was far short of what he craved. Tycho realized that to get better precision, he could build larger instruments, as these would have smaller graduations. He soon got an opportunity. One day, while standing outside the workshop holding his sextant, he struck up a conversation with a passer-by. The man was Paul Heinzel, a rich noble who owned a large estate on the outskirts of Augsburg. A keen amateur astronomer, he was curious about Tycho's descriptions of his new instruments. They formed an immediate bond, which deepened when Heinzel revealed he was an old school friend of Peder Ox. Heinzel commissioned Tycho to build a quadrant in the grounds of his country house. A quadrant, like a sextant, measures the angle between celestial objects, using a sight which moves through 90 degrees. Quadrants were not new, but the scale of the instrument commissioned by Heinzel was huge, roughly 5.5 meters in radius. At least 40 men were needed to host the instrument erect in the grounds of Heinzel's estate. This was the largest instrument Tycho would ever build, but rather than a great success, the quadrant served as a lesson. Despite its impressive accuracy, practical limitations meant it was never used in a major program of observations. The sheer size of the quadrant meant that a large team was required to align and operate it, which meant it quickly fell out of use. Tycho enjoyed his time in Augsburg, but was soon reminded he couldn't escape his responsibilities. In 1571, word reached him that his birth father Otto was dead. Tycho was the eldest son, but in Danish society there was no primogeniture, so the inheritance was divided between Otto's heirs. Fortunately, the estates were enormous, including 4 grand manors, 500 farms, 60 cottages, 14 mills, 40 rental properties in Copenhagen, as well as a sizable amount of forest. As the oldest son, Tycho was due the family estate, Knudstorp, though this was awkward. His mother and younger siblings still resided there, while he had mostly been a stranger. What's more, as he'd spent the last decade pursuing academic interests, he had no experience managing a fief. A knight in the 16th century would have been expected to collect rents, manage farmers, and most importantly, defend the area from attack. Tycho was woefully unprepared for this responsibility. The simple solution was for his brothers and mother to continue to manage the estate. This again left Tycho free to travel. He went to stay with his maternal uncle, Steen Bille, who was residing at an abbey, Hereward, a few miles northeast of Knudstorp. During this time, he met a local woman, Kirsten Jorgensdatter, who had become his partner. Kirsten was a commoner, meaning she would never be able to marry Tycho. But this arrangement suited Tycho fine. Marriage to a noblewoman would have come with obligations and expectations Tycho had no desire to fulfill. Courtly life consumed his time and left him with less opportunity to pursue astronomy. Relationships between social classes were also relatively common in the period, and were to an extent institutionalized in Denmark. Once Kirsten had lived for 3 winters under Tycho's roof, she would be recognized as his common-law wife. But, no matter their legal status, Kirsten and Tycho had a loving relationship which would last for the remainder of their lives. At Hereward, Tycho's attention was drawn away from astronomy, and for a while he pursued his other great interest, alchemy. His intention was not to turn base metals into gold, but to make medicines. He was heavily influenced by the Swiss doctor Paracelsus, who had begun an anti-Galenic revolution in medicine. Tycho used the abbey's workshops and stocked them with glassware which he used to distill potions. Like many alchemists, Tycho approached his work with utmost secrecy, and so his progress is undocumented. Nevertheless, we know he spent a significant amount of time on alchemy during this period. The shift in Tycho's interests away from astronomy may have continued had it not been for a remarkable event which drew him back. One cool evening, in late 1572, while returning from his alchemy workshop, Tycho noticed a bright new star in the sky. Dumbstruck, he called out to his servants to confirm what he was seeing. But any doubts vanished the next morning. The light was still visible. At first, Tycho assumed it was a comet, but the lack of tail made him doubt this. Since comets were known to move, he needed to measure its motion to make sure. Dropping his alchemy, Tycho began again to measure the sky. Despite his best efforts to improve his instruments, the available equipment was not ideal. He had a sextant, but these were only designed to measure angles up to 60 degrees from the horizon. The new star was almost directly overhead. Ingeniously, he solved the problem by turning the sextant upside down and mounting it in a window frame. Over the next month, Tycho measured the new star night after night and found that its position didn't change. Tycho knew that this was significant. If it wasn't a comet, what was it? He was unaware of the stars of 1006 and 1054, but he did know that in the 2nd century BC, Hipparchus had reported a new star. Hipparchus's observation, however, had mostly been ignored by later astronomers because it didn't fit with the views of Aristotle. Since the Middle Ages, Aristotle's ideas had predominated in natural philosophy. His work was taught as dogma in the universities. Astronomical observations were not judged on their merit, but how they fit with Aristotle. At the heart of the issue was the division Aristotle made between the celestial and sublunar realms. According to him, the heavens, home to the planets, the sun and the stars, were perfect, eternal and unchanging. By contrast, the sublunar realm, containing the earth, was characterized by decay, change and imperfection. For Tycho, the crucial question was, where is the new star? If it was below the moon, Aristotle's ideas were safe. But if it was in the celestial realm, then the sudden appearance of a new star challenged a key piece of Aristotle's philosophy. Tycho set out to measure the distance to the new star. The standard method to work out the distance to an object was to measure parallax. Parallax is the apparent motion of an object against a background when viewed from different points. A simple example is holding up your finger at arm's length and looking at it through only one eye. By switching eyes, its apparent position seems to change against the background. An important feature of parallax is that it's only obvious when the object viewed is relatively close compared to the background. If you view a tree on a distant hill, for example, you're not going to see parallax as you switch between eyes. In the case of the new star, no parallax implied the object was far away, whereas a visible parallax implied that it was relatively close. It was known that the parallax of the moon could be observed, whereas for the stars it could not. A measurement of parallax, then, would heavily imply that its distance was similar to the moon's. Tycho was not the first person to have an idea like this. In 1472, Regiomontanus and Feuerbach had observed a comet. Aristotle knew about comets, but argued they were weather phenomena and part of the sublunar realm. Regiomontanus and Feuerbach attempted to measure the distance of the comet, but they were hindered by the fact the comet was moving. They failed to separate out the apparent motion due to parallax from the real motion of the comet. Fortunately, Tycho's job would be much easier. The new star seemed to be stationary, and so any apparent movement would be due to parallax. Nevertheless, this was a delicate measurement, and before attempting it, Tycho returned to Copenhagen. He expected in Copenhagen to enter into debate about the new star, but to his astonishment, no one else beside himself seems to have noticed it. He met with two friends, Charles de Danke and Johannes Pratensis. When Tycho told them about the star, they were incredulous. They assumed he must be playing a joke, until Tycho took them outside to see the new star for themselves. Throughout the rest of 1572, the new star stayed in the sky. To measure its parallax, Tycho took nightly recordings of its positions relative to the surrounding stars. He knew that if it were as close as the moon, the star would have a parallax of around a degree, well within the resolution of his instruments. Yet, through the entire period, Tycho could find no parallax. Against the background, the new star didn't seem to move at all. Tycho concluded that the new star could not be close to Earth. It must lie amongst the fixed stars. He began to write down his results and shared them with his friends, Doncke and Pratensis. They urged him to publish, but Tycho was reluctant. Astronomy had been a hobby, but men of Tycho's noble status were not supposed to pursue academic study seriously. He made excuses, claiming the manuscript lacked polish. Tycho was further encouraged by his uncle, Peder Ox, who had become Lord Chancellor and effective head of the government. Peder suggested that Tycho shouldn't worry about the loss of status, but if he were, he could perhaps publish anonymously. Tycho is still unsure, and what ultimately seems to have changed his mind were reports coming in of other observations. Many astronomers had noticed the new star, but were claiming that it was just a comet. Further, they stated that the object was relatively close to Earth, in the sublunary realm. This angered Tycho, and he eventually agreed to publish a 28-page manuscript outlining his results. The manuscript was dry, relying on the technical details of his observations, rather than making a forceful argument. In this, he had underestimated the strength of opposition. His rival astronomers, not ready to let go of Aristotle's philosophy, were not inclined to accept Tycho's argument. Realizing his mistake, he appended an introduction, attacking his detractors as dull wits and blind observers. Tycho found some support. Michael Mastelin, a professor of astronomy in Heidelberg, made his own parallax measurements and reached the same conclusion. Compared to Tycho, Michael's methods were primitive and lacked precision, but Tycho appreciated the support. The debate was not settled, but regardless, Tycho's work was read widely. Tycho spent the rest of the year at Knudstorp with his family, a situation that was likely strained. His mother was still alive, and probably Kirsten wasn't welcomed into the family home. Tycho had grown apart from his family, and there was no prospect he would stay long term. Still, he continued to make observations, using his younger sister Sophie as his assistant. The new star continued to shine for the rest of the year, though it dimmed, and by March of 1574 it disappeared from view. With the new star gone, Tycho was again set adrift. His manuscript had won him international renown, but despite his success, it was unclear where he fit. He considered leaving, to go abroad again. In 1574, he was invited to give some lectures on astronomy at the University of Copenhagen. Had Tycho been born into the middle class, perhaps he would have found his place, but nobles in the 16th century did not become university professors. Tycho, though, was probably unbothered by this constraint. He had a greater goal in mind. His experience with the new star had given him confidence. Through meticulous observations, he had swept aside Aristotle's old philosophy. Now he envisaged something much greater, a program of observational astronomy which would surpass anything before. To realize this, he would need money, time, and freedom. He considered selling all his land and possessions in Denmark and going to live in Basel. But just as he was pondering his future, he received an offer he couldn't refuse.